Welcome back to part 2 of this series on mood disorders. In part 1, we covered depressive disorders. Now we will look at bipolar and related disorders. As I mentioned before, this section actually comes between schizophrenia spectrum and depressive disorders in the DSM. And the DSM refers to this as a bridge between the schizophrenia spectrum disorders and the depressive disorders because it can manifest with kind of states from both sides of these disorders. But as we saw in the depression video, especially with the video with Mary, there can be aspects of even schizophrenia in depressive disorders, especially the delusions and hallucinations and potential catatonia can all be in depressive disorders, bipolar disorders, and schizophrenia disorders. So all three of these are joined together via different symptoms. But bipolar and related disorders covers both bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, which are two separate disorders, as well as cyclothymic disorder, and then bipolar and related disorders due to things like substance use, medications, medical conditions, and then just the other category. So let's get into this. What does bipolar mean, though? Maybe we've all heard this term before, but it's relatively new. This disorder used to be known as manic depression, which I think has a much more literal name for it, which I kind of like because it is literally made up of either mania or hypomania and depression. So it's aptly named, but bipolar is also a good name for it because in many ways you can think of this disorder as a person switching, or what's the term? Cycling between poles. So going from, if you think of the south pole of a magnet and the north pole of a magnet, with the south pole being, depressive states and the north pole being elevated states, then yeah, that's kind of like a person's moods when they have bipolar. They swap between poles, but usually it's not as quick as like it's made out to be in media or TV shows or just people that misunderstand mental health disorders. You're not swapping from being depressed at around lunch to then feeling really great around dinner and then depressed again by the time you go to bed. That's not bipolar disorder. For bipolar disorder, the major depressive episodes and the manic or hypomanic episodes have to last multiple days at a time before you switch to a different mood. Really, we refer to the other cases just having very high mood lability, the idea that you can switch between moods quickly. And that's more of a symptom of other disorders. But when we're talking about switching between moods and bipolar disorders, it really is long periods of time. So as we'll see, one of the first criteria in these disorders is having had a major depressive episode. And we know that to have a major depressive episode, it takes having symptoms for at least 2 weeks to qualify. So it's not something you're swapping in between a day or even in a few days. It takes 2 weeks of feeling depressed to kind of check off that half of the box that meets the depressive side of bipolar. But yeah, in general, bipolar can be understood as a disorder that has periods of depressed moods as well as periods of elevated moods. So depressed moods, we know what major depressive episodes are. We just covered that in the last video. I'm not going to review this again, so feel free to just rewatch the video. But 5 more of these for 2 weeks is a major depressive episode. So let's just keep that in mind as we go forward in learning these other criteria. So then there's the depressive side, and then there's the antidepressive side, the elevated happy mood. Again, that can be thought of as either mania or hypomania. So let's look at these criteria. Criterion A is a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, as well as abnormal and persistently increased activity or energy. So having increased activity and energy is true for anyone that's experiencing that elevated state in bipolar. So just being more energetic, being more active, wanting to be more active and energetic. And you can see how that can go hand in hand with having a persistently elevated, expansive mood. You're feeling really good. You're happy. You're optimistic. You want to. And we'll see how that manifests in these other symptoms. But it's just, if you can think of just what you feel like on a really good day, that's kind of what we're getting at. Except, as we get into full mania, it's even more so. It's the most extreme good day you've ever had, but for days at a time. But as you see, it can also be just irritability. It doesn't have to be happiness. It could be that there's irritability, but it has to be at that increased activity and energy. So no matter what, they are more active and energetic than baseline. But that could go hand in hand with being much more happier in an elevated mood or an irritable mood. So either way it can manifest as. That's criterion A. More energy and a change in mood. And then B is that during this mood disturbance that also has increased energy, 3 or more of the following have also been present. But 4 if the mood's only irritable, just to make sure that it is actually bipolar disorder and not something else. So inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, we've kind of learned about, we know that through grandiose delusions, that idea of grandiosity means feeling very important or very good about yourself, or that you're special. But it doesn't have to, so it can be all the way to the point of delusional grandiosity to, that you are the best person that's ever existed. But it can just be increased self-esteem or inflated self-esteem to where you just feel really good about yourself. You know that you're looking good and you're hot shit, and you can, if you wanted to, you could, run that 6-minute mile and do that amazing skateboard trick. And it's just, you know that you are awesome and you can do whatever you want to, and you just feel great about yourself. That's one of the criteria symptoms. Also a decreased need for sleep. So either just feeling like you don't need it at all, or maybe you're still trying to sleep but you just can't. But regardless, the next morning, whether you've had 4 hours or 2 hours of sleep, you feel like you've had a full night's rest. So for this whole period of increased mood or mood changes, increased activity and energy, you just don't physically need as much sleep, or at least you feel like you don't. So you're going days at a time without having anywhere near your average level of sleep that you would during a baseline. More talkative than usual, as well as just a pressure to keep talking. So again, you have to compare this to someone's baseline. If they're normally quiet, then during a period of increased mood, they might just kind of chew your ear off and just go from topic to topic, which we'll see is more of that flight of ideas and racing thoughts. Just not only feeling like they just want to keep talking, but just through that ability to keep talking, they're just talking about anything that enters their mind. And because their mind is more active and energetic than usual, they experience this flight of ideas and racing thoughts that is kind of coinciding with their racing speech. So it's sort of similar to ADHD in that you're constantly, not constantly, but you're having difficulty concentrating because you're able to easily switch focus to a different idea. So distractibility as well. All these kind of tie together, but it's hard to keep your concentration because everything's important and everything deserves your attention, and you're just thinking about everything. So yeah. But as well, there's an increase in goal-directed activity. So during this time, you're feeling great. You have increased activity and energy. You don't need to sleep as much. On top of all that, maybe you also clean your entire house from floor to ceiling, scrubbing all the tiles, every little detail. It's just an amazingly cleaned house, all kind of in one 24-hour period where you just stayed up all night doing it. And it was just an amazingly fun time because you listened to music and you were just like really enjoying it and really goal directed. And just, this is awesome. I clean my entire house. I'm an amazing person. Maybe I'll open up my own cleaning business. And So an increase in goal-directed activity. It could also be hobbies. You might be taking up, and if you're mixing this in with like the distractibility and everything, you might take up one hobby and then quickly switch to another hobby and start building the swing set for the backyard. But then while you're building the swing set, you realize you have to get a jigsaw, and then when you get a jigsaw, you're reminded that What about you remember jigsaw puzzles? Like, what if we try to make a jigsaw puzzle, and then you make a jigsaw puzzle and you fix that, and that wasn't that great, so you realize you really need to paint it, so you go to the store and get some paint, and now that you got this paint, you're like, why don't I paint a picture? I used to paint pictures. I'm a great artist. I could paint pictures. So you start painting pictures, and you realize your room's not really that great for painting, so you need to really just turn this spare room into an art studio. So this is going to be my art studio now. So you can see how you started off building a swing, and now you're in an art studio. 100% just a random example, but I think it kind of illustrates a little bit about how these can join together and kind of what these mood periods might be like. Again, it's different for everybody though. And then along with increased goal direct activity, there's also could be an excessive amount of involvement in high risk activities. This could be sexual indiscretion, so just being very flirty, all the way to having sex with more people more frequently and more indiscriminately than you typically would during a baseline period. It can also be gambling. Maybe you decide to fly off to Vegas and hit the craps tables for a weekend on a whim because you just feel so good about yourself and you feel really lucky. Or maybe you just are spending tons and tons of money on these random hobbies that kind of interest you, or shopping or just anything. Increased risk activities can be drug use, sex, money, anything that's risky. These kind of excessive activities or excessive involvement in these high risk activities can increase during this period. So I've named all these symptoms of this elevated mood. Now I want to ask, is this manic or hypomanic? Did I not label that? Uh-oh. Maybe I did that on purpose. So tell me, is this describing mania or hypomania? Well, there's my question. It's both, actually. So mania and hypomania have the same basic criteria. They have the same symptom profiles. They manifest in very similar ways. Now we know through our prefixes that hypo means below. So a hypomanic episode is below that of a manic episode. So we know that by definition, hypomanic is less severe than manic. But that doesn't mean it has different symptoms. It's still the same symptoms of mania, but it's less severe. So let's look at the actual differences between mania and hypomania. The first one that we see there is episode length. With a manic episode, it needs to last at least a week before you diagnose, while a hypomanic episode only needs to last 4 days. I want us to not pay as much attention to that one. That's a smaller detail here. I've had classes in the past kind of get hung up on that and really look for the time difference to differentiate between the two, but that's not what's really important. What's important is the severity of the episode. So there's a couple different features that can make something manic versus hypomanic. If you've ever been hospitalized for your mood change, and that's the elevated part of it, not the depressed part. If you've ever been hospitalized because of an elevated increased energy mood, then it's automatically manic. By definition, hospitalization due to manic symptoms means that it's a manic episode. You cannot be hospitalized due to a hypomanic episode. By definition, it's impossible, because whether it was a hypomanic episode or not, if your psychiatrist had diagnosed you as being in a hypomanic episode, but then a day later, something happened during your episode that required hospitalization, then it's no longer hypomanic. It is completely diagnosed as manic. So again, it's because what really differentiates these two is the severity, and what the DSM is saying is that if it's severe enough to require you to be hospitalized, it's no longer hypomania. It's now reached the severity level of mania. Another aspect of if there's psychotic features, so delusions or hallucinations, if they're present, by definition, it's manic. You cannot have delusions or hallucinations in a hypomanic episode, because it's no longer hypomania if you're hearing voices. It's mania. So this can be a little difficult to tell, especially when you're dealing with delusions, because even in hypomania, there is that increased grandiosity that can almost be perceived as delusional. But again, someone with hypomania, they might feel really great about themselves, but they can still, when pressured, probably admit that they're not, that amazing, or they couldn't do that kind of thing. But again, that's not like the only criteria for whether it's mania or not. But if there are delusions or hallucinations, it's automatically mania. Then the broader one that is going to apply more frequently is just, if it's hypomania, the changes that occur to your mood and activity are observable by others. So your friends and family can tell that something's different about you, that you have an increase in mood and activity, but it's not severe enough that it causes marked impairment. So when we're dealing with this level of severity, it's really about how much of your everyday functioning is impaired by your manic or hypomanic symptoms. So technically in hypomania, it's noticeable, but it's not causing you to completely miss work and get fired from work, or not go to school and like fail your class or your tests, or cause you to get into these like very big relationship fights that break up relationships. A hypomanic episode should not be severe enough to cause impairment. It might cause some impairment, but not marked impairment, which again is getting to the subjective idea of there are some instances maybe where one psychiatrist might diagnose someone as being in a manic episode, while another might diagnose just hypomanic. There is some gray area, but in general, if it's severe enough to think that this can really affect someone's life during this episode, then it most likely is mania. The easier ones really are the hospitalization, the psychotic features, because that's a simple, that's a manic sign. That third one is kind of more of a gray area, but is also more likely to be how that decision is made. But yeah, manic and hypomanic are similar states. It's just really about the severity of it. So if we're looking at the differences between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, then the difference is that bipolar 1 has had a manic episode, while bipolar 2 has never had a manic episode. So if you've ever had a manic episode in your life, you have bipolar 1. The end. Technically, you also need to have a major depressive episode, but not really technically. So the reason that is because, yes, it's true that bipolar is characterized by ups and downs. But when you're dealing with a manic episode, there's instances where you don't want to or don't need to wait around to see if there is also a major depressive episode before you can actually give a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So if someone is hospitalized in a manic state, they're in a manic episode and they've required hospitalization, just think, you don't want to have your doctor have to be like, oh, you've never had a depressive episode? Well, I guess we should wait around and see if that happens before we give you your diagnosis. No, you're currently in a manic episode. That's enough. We know you have bipolar 1. With bipolar 2, that's not true as much, because a hypomanic episode on the lower end of the spectrum of hypomania can resemble just someone having a really good day for a week. It's less likely, but because it could be mistaken, because a really good mood can be mistaken for hypomania, it also needs to have that cycle of also having had major depressive episodes. So for bipolar 2, it's required that you've had a major depressive episode before you can get a diagnosis. Bipolar 1, it's only required that you've had a manic episode. Another difference is that in bipolar 2, you've only ever had hypomanic episodes. You cannot have had a manic episode and be diagnosed with bipolar 2. It automatically gets converted to bipolar 1. So bipolar 2 is only ever hypomanic episodes plus at least one major depressive episode. And it's not just a less intense form of bipolar 1. It is its own separate condition. We've known through genetic studies that a parent with bipolar 2 is more likely to have a child with bipolar 2, while a parent with bipolar 1 is more likely to have a child with bipolar 1. So there is some of that heredity in between these subtypes of diagnoses. So there's something that is linking and present that is bipolar 1 versus something that is present that is bipolar 2, enough to where it can be passed down as such. Bipolar 2 also has more frequent depressive episodes than bipolar 1, so it has its own different pattern as well. So you can't just say, oh, bipolar 2 is just a less severe bipolar 1. It is true with the manic portion of it that it is less severe, but the impact it has on your life, especially with the more frequent depressive episodes, can have just as much severity in some ways as bipolar 1. So just don't think of it like that, even though I'm the one that told you to first think of it so you could not think of it. Anyways, how do you code bipolar? Well, this is for bipolar 1, and it's just a behemoth of a chart here. But let's just look at the first column. So first, we have bipolar 1, current or most recent episode, manic. And then you have the F31.X, and you fill in whether, so you can, okay, I'm not sure if I say this somewhere else in the slides or not, but here's a point to say it. Manic episodes get a severity. Hypomanic episodes do not get a severity. Again, that's kind of going back to the point of that manic episodes are more severe, while hypomanic episodes are less severe. Kind of all hypomanic episodes are lumped together. They're not severe enough to be manic. While manic episodes, there can be a mild manic episode, a moderate manic episode, or a severe manic episode. A mild manic episode is still more severe than any form of a hypomanic episode. Even though it has the name mild, it's still a more severe version of hypomanic. So we can see based off of the severity level of the manic episode, you change the coding. So a severe manic episode that is their current or most recent episode of bipolar 1 would get F31.13. Also see that with psychotic features get 0.2, and then there's partial remission, full remission, unspecified. If the current most recent episode is hypomanic, then it's F31.0 regardless for the first 4. Again, you don't give severity, so it's not available. It's just F31.0. And also, it can't be with psychotic features, because if it has psychotic features, it's not hypomanic, it's manic. So then the only real change that can happen is if it's a current most recent episode hypomanic and it's in partial, full remission, or unspecified. Then you might change it to that. Do you? Let me make sure, because that would mean that it would be the same code for manic or hypomanic. No, it's not. It's different. Okay, 7172 is different from 7374. So yes, you do replace it. F3171 is a bipolar 1 current and most recent episode hypomanic in partial remission. Then if current and most recent episode is depressed, you do the same thing. You give a severity level for the depressive episode. So if it's a severe depressive state that they're in, it's F31.4. Gets a little confusing here, but a bipolar 2 can have depressive episodes, right? During the depressive episode in bipolar 2, a person can have psychotic features during their depressive episode and still maintain their diagnosis of bipolar 2. The psychotic feature issue between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 is only when we're talking about manic or hypomanic episodes. So a hypomanic episode with psychotic features is automatically a manic episode. A depressive episode with psychotic features is just a depressive episode with psychotic features. There's no change there. It's just something that we've known about. In major depressive episodes, there could be psychotic features. That doesn't affect your diagnosis. It doesn't affect whether it's a manic or hypomanic episode, because it's all during your depressed episode. So it's self-contained to the depressive episodes, which are separate from the manic or hypomanic episodes. And then finally, if it's current most recent episode unspecified, it's F31.9. So it really depends on when you're seeing the client, this meeting that I'm seeing them in, that I'm filling out this insurance information for on this day, what was the current or most recent episode they were experiencing? And then what was the severity or remission level that they were at? So let's watch this interview that I have. I put interview in quotes, and we can see why. But yeah, I really like this guy. He's one of my favorite interviews of the class. Just a warning that this guy is very vocal and speaks his mind and is not bashful at all, as he says.
Hey, if you don't like this dirty talk on the thing, the hell with you.
I've cut out some of his more dated language that is offensive, but he still has very strong opinions about people and religion and things. So just a warning. I don't like to censor things in general in my class, just because when we see our clients in real life, we don't get to censor them. They aren't censored, so we might as well prepare for it now. But there's still some language that just serves no purpose. And So just say that there would be probably some cursing, but hopefully nothing worse. But yeah, just watch the interview and then we'll talk about it.
What are you holding that thing in front of my face for, huh? Let's take a picture. I'm so goddamn beautiful. The girls are just jumping all over my ass. Not only the girls, but the boys, too, and the men. I gotta have a bodyguard. Reverend Ellington is a big, tough guy. He keeps them goddamn boys off of me. Is there a girl in the... Well, she might as well learn the facts a lot. Ah, they say... Oh, yeah. Now, what do you want to know? I'm gonna pose like a son of a bitch, too. Show my teeth. Okay. Shoot. What do you want to know? I'll tell you all about how to cure the sick. You know what makes them sick. Now I'm going to tell you how to cure them. First of all, do away with the electric shock. It interferes with the abstract thinking, the prefrontal lobes. Bring back the metrazole, but fatten them up with meat, the muscle, not the fat, the muscle. Plenty of meat and liver, mostly liver, meat, fish, eggs, all your dairy products, but don't mix the milk with the meat. Go back to the Jewish dietary laws. Gabish. Then you give them the metrazole. 3 treatments and I was all right. I had 3 electric shocks that made me crazy. 60 insulin treatments did nothing but blow up my body. I weighed 180 pounds, but the metrazole, the pins and needles went right out of my head. And the anxiety and laying on the couch like a dead man, that disappeared. Bring back the metrazole. Dr. Murphy, a good Irish Catholic doctor, invented it. And Dr. Bellinger in the Brooklyn State Hospital, he used it on me and got me out in 4 months on my 21st birthday, February 22nd. What a gift, huh? On Labor Day of 1957, the Christian Science practitioner brought me out of it. Then I decided I was going to commit suicide. I tried everything, even the Roman Catholic, the pieces of the bones of St. Teresa and all that shit. I drank holy oil and holy water. My sister bathed me with all that bullshit. And I said, either I'm going to get cured this weekend or I'm going to get the throat cut, because the doctors had written to my sister, and I sneak. I'm a snoop. Hey, he's hopeless. He's going to stay here for life. I passed the Catholic chaplain's office, and the Protestant minister, that son of a bitch, he says to the priest, he says, I see they threw the Christian Scientists out of the chapel. And the priest said, well, they do what's good. You see, the Catholics are very charitable. He said they do what they can, because we're only a small group. I said, the son of a bitch, right at that moment, mind you, when I heard it, that's not coincidence, that's a divine plan. I went to the Christian Scientist. In 3 days, on a Monday, I came back to the hospital. The Jewish doctor, he looked at me. I was sitting big as life on the telephone. He says, quoting from the Bible, he hath put the mighty down from their seat and hath exalted them of low degree. I was a dead dog on the floor on the Friday when I went on past, and on Monday I was a big shot behind the goddamn desk. See, now I was all right for a couple of years, but I worked too goddamn hard. Then the son of a bitch Hendy, he forces me to take electric shock up there. I call him a bag of bones, a rag bag, a refugee from the rag bag, a Protestant son of a bitch again. He gave me the electric shock. He destroyed my memory and my thinking process. A dirty bastard. He's going to pay with crushed hands. You put this right on the goddamn film. Because my brother Mike's in the syndicate, and Vinny is his helper too. I want this all to go right on the goddamn soundtrack. Either that or he's going to go down on his goddamn knees. And he's going to get the electric shock. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That son of a bitch is going to get electric shock. He's crazy. He's got the Jehovah complex. This time it was the medicine and the Christian Science too. The Nardil and the Stelazine and this new one, the Meloril. And the sodium amytal for the people that can't sleep at night. Why don't you use the sodium amytal? It isn't that habit-forming, is it? Hey, come on. You're supposed to be telling me. This is all I get. Meloril to keep me from going into euphoria. See, that's what happened the last time. I went so high, be Jesus, there was nobody holding me down. I went not past the goddamn moon or the rocket. I was way up on them goddamn, all those, anyway, those... Come on, help me.
I don't know.
You don't know? You didn't study astronomy. What the hell's the matter with you? The outer space. Way back, 10 million light years away. See, but I had to have my feet on the ground. I had my feet on the ground. My head was 1,000,000 miles away, you see. Now the head is back down on the earth. The feet have always been on the ground. The head was in the mud, too. When I was, not catatonic. I had no memory. I had amnesia, almost 98%. Now the happy medium. Now I'm this way, like yous want. Like the smoothing of the water when they throw the oil on the water, this way. And when somebody says something rotten to me or they hit me, I don't get hurt and depressed and slink into a chair. I get so goddamn mad I beat the shit out of them like my mother did with the baseball bat. My mother hit them goddamn whops in the head with a baseball bat. And the girls, if they come home late, she hit the boyfriends on the back with a broom and she threw the dishes at the girls like Maggie and Jiggs. Down the cellar she chased them. She'd sit up and cussing and swearing and putting a curse of Rome on their head until 11 o'clock they were all in. Then she said the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, and she went to bed and she slept the peace of the just. That's why she survived to be 51. With 9 children, 7 daughters, keeping company at the same time. She had 6 or 7 more children after that, stillbirths and some that lived. Oh, my brothers, what a tragedy. With 2 boys, me and my brother Ziggy, and the 7 girls that lived. The girls were tough. But the 5 or 6 boys she had after that, well, in that time of life, they're not supposed to have the children. They were either stillbirths, or they died, or the doctors couldn't put the life into them, or they died within 3 or 4 months. She was too old. She had her last children when she was in her 40s.
Does that sadden you?
No! I got all kinds of little brothers here and there. I was in the Big Brothers organization in Boston when I was a Protestant minister.
You're from Boston?
No, I went to Boston University there. Brothers and sisters. You're all my brothers and sisters. The Jews are my best friends and the Christian Scientists. The Protestants are all fucked up. They're all against something, but they ain't for it. I can't figure out what the hell are they for. They're negative. Protestants, they're the son of a bitches that go preaching the Bible up and down them goddamn halls there, and they're saying they're being persecuted. They're not being persecuted. The son of a bitches are sick. They see visions and hear voices and all that horse shit. The only ones that saw the visions and heard the voices that were real saints were people like Joan of Arc. There was a real... She didn't hear voices. Only what we Christian Scientists call angel thoughts, God directing our thought processes. Not voices. We don't hear voices and we don't see visions. We see in the mind's eye. You do too, don't you? Right here now. Can't you picture your wife and your children at home and what she's doing, getting your supper prepared? You can.
Sure.
Of course, that's what it is in Christian Science, only clear. I'm spitting all over the place, that is. Oh, where's that cup of java? Not on. Cup of poison, I call it. You know what the coffee is good for? It serves as a good purgative to wash your lower intestine out. And the trianesia I get, it settles the acid stomach. But I haven't had any trianesia for 2 days. Because they're afraid of me. I terrorize the ward. And Reverend Ellington, who's my very best friend, he's doing the healing work. He's a student of Christian Science, too, now. Because I don't want to be bothered. I pray for them, too, but I ain't going to fight. I play the piano and I pray for the son of a bitches, that's all. They're mostly a bunch of dead bellies. They're dead from the neck up and from the waist down. They ain't got far to go. They're alive in the pants, most of them. But from here on up, they're dead spiritually and mentally. From here on down, oh, the bellies are alive. They pile all that goddamn chow in there, and they never take a shit. You ought to hear the way they stink, some of them old bastards that sit in the chairs. And these shits maybe once a week. It smells like a serpent crawled up his ass and died there. Hey, if you don't like this dirty talk on the thing, the hell with you. Mrs. Mayer and Dr. Slockbauer would approve. There's nothing bashful about me. When I was a kid, I used to run down the cellar and hide in the coal bin when anybody came in the door. But they shut me out of that. The insurance man used to come around on Friday night and ask my mother, can George come and turn the lights out in the synagogue? I flicked the switch, the old rabbis. Orthodox, I still go see them every time I'm there. That's the first place I head for the rabbis over there. They couldn't flick the switch. He used to lift me up. I was 5 or 6 years old. Let me just pose a little bit now. I wish I had some different clothes. Oh, look at the clear, beautiful eyes. Let me see. Get me all around here. How about the physique? Shall I take my shirt off or anything
Won't
like
show. Sit down.
No. On the hand, I told you. I'm not repressed anymore, kid. I'm not inhibited, but I'm not an extrovert either. I know when to shut up and listen to people who know.
Can you now?
I certainly can. I can maintain silence here for the rest of the time, and you talk. I asked you to. Go ahead.
Well, let's see if you can keep quiet for a few moments.
Mm-hmm.
done very well.
I have complete control. I don't have the control. God has the control. The mind of Christ, or near Christ. Now you do the talking. I refuse to talk now. You insulted me. You insult my intelligence and my sensibilities. We're very sensitive, we Italians. Very dramatic. I could cuss you out 1 minute and the next minute I'm all over you. Like I told you, the nurse, that Dudley, that son of a bitch. I told Miss Sherman, she's a sweet little girl, she's like a little mouse. Stay the hell away from Dudley. Listen, while I was there, he was locked up in the security room all day long. Today he was out all morning. Ellington's been working with him, and the Protestant chaplain came in. In other words, all the faiths have come in.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip, because I know that I do, but I really am left with just one question after watching it. Was that a manic or a hypomanic episode? Well, if we go back to our criteria that we know, was he hospitalized for this state? Technically, we don't know. He might have gone in for this interview on his own, and obviously he has had involvement in the psychiatry industry, and he's been hospitalized before. It might have been hospitalized during a manic episode, and he has bipolar 1. Maybe he's only ever been hospitalized in his depressive states, though. So if he's only ever been hospitalized in depression, then it doesn't affect whether it's manic or hypomanic, and he can still have bipolar 2, even though he's been hospitalized for the condition. He's only been hospitalized for his depressive episodes, not for the manic episodes. But regardless of whether he's had a manic episode in the past or not, what is this current one? Is he currently manic or hypomanic? Or is he just a talkative person? Well, that's where it really becomes important to know what someone's baseline is, because without knowing what they were like before this change in mood, it's impossible to know what this mood represents. If this person has always been a talkative, energetic person, and this might just be how they talk, this might just be the way they act. I think we all know people that are people that dominate conversations and talk, a lot. But if this man had, 3 weeks ago talked very slower and calmer and had more of a conversation and waited for people to ask him questions and things, and then the change happened to where he had increased self-esteem, and obviously we see a pressure to keep talking, especially with that example that the doctor had him do where he wanted to see if he could just sit and not talk. There was a clear pressure that he had to keep talking. Let's just look at all the symptoms. So inflated self-esteem, grandiosity. He definitely thinks he looks really good. He likes the way he feels. He automatically starts off the interview saying, "This is how you cure people. This is the way that you should be treating these sick people." So if you think about it, he is starting off an interview with the psychiatrist, telling the psychiatrist what he's doing wrong or what he should be doing. So that's a little bit of a increased self-esteem or grandiosity, knowing that you know more about how to help people than a psychiatrist does. Need for sleep, we're not sure about. More talkative than usual, pressure to keep talking. Again, we don't know his baseline, but he's definitely very talkative and has a pressure to keep talking. Flight of ideas and racing thoughts, yes. He changes topics very quickly. Distractibility, I think so. There's different times when he just completely loses his train of thought because of like just maybe wasn't there somewhere where he was like adjusting the way he was sitting, and that maybe that was a different person that we'll see in a little bit. Goal-directed activity, we're not really sure, or the high-risk activities, but so the only ones we can really say for sure are inflated self-esteem, more talkative, flights of ideas, distractibility. But it only needs 3, so we can say that he does, as long as we were able to see his baseline and know that this is a change from his typical behavior, then yes, this is enough for a hypomanic episode, at least. The question that I had asked is this manic or hypomanic? Again, we don't really know. If he has not currently been hospitalized for this, I would lean towards hypomanic, because although there's obviously, or it seems to me like there is a increase in all these things, if he was just living his life as usual in this mood, I feel like he could most likely still carry on with his day-to-day functioning. just in a happy, very talkative way. He's not so pressured to do activities or to being goal directed that he can't sit still and focus on one idea for longer than a few seconds, or he's not putting himself physically at risk or at harm. So there's a lot of reasons why it's not likely severe enough right now to be hypomania. But it's important to note that even though if he's not in a hypomanic episode right now, he could still have bipolar 1, because bipolar 1 is just, have you ever had a manic episode? That means in the future you could switch back to only ever having hypomanic episodes. But if you had a manic episode at one time, you're bipolar 1, regardless of whether your next episode is hypomanic. It doesn't switch back. It's bipolar once, bipolar 1 once, bipolar 1 always, regardless of what your future episodes are. So he might have had a manic episode and was hospitalized, got a bipolar 1 diagnosis, and now he's experiencing a hypomanic episode. That's just, I think I lean towards hypomania. It could still be mania. There's really not enough information to fully know from just this interview. But hopefully you enjoyed the interview, because I know I do. How do you know he's not just an energetic person? I already asked that question. But really you have to, it's the baseline. You have to know, what was he like before this change in moods? And here's some specifiers. A lot of the specifiers are shared with the depressive episodes, which I've already covered, but we'll look at some that are a little unique. So there's that mixed features that we talked about last episode or last session. Mixed features meaning that during a manic or hypomanic episode, there are symptoms of depression, and during a depressive episode, there are symptoms of mania or hypomania. So we'll look at the first one. During a hypomanic or manic episode, you've met the full criteria for manic episode or hypomanic episode, plus 3 or more for most of the days of the mood episode. Depressed mood or dysphoria, anhedonia, psychomotor retardation, fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. So you can see how this is like, how does this happen? Someone has increased self-esteem, grandiosity, increased activity, increased mood, all these great things, but then they're also feeling depressed, fatigued, and worthless. It can happen, is all I can say. It's a condition that occurs. There's some debate whether this is its own unique condition, separate from just typical bipolar disorder. But regardless, it's possible to be in a manic state but also feel depressive symptoms, and vice versa. It's possible to be in a depressive state but also have manic symptoms. So, with depressive episodes, it's much more likely that you'd meet that criteria by things like decreased need for sleep, increased high-risk activity, more talkative, more self-esteem, while also feeling all the depressive symptoms. But again, it can be in a combination. It's not the most common specifier, but it does happen again. But it's a very poorly understood condition, these mixed features. It's also important to note, as I saw in the book, that if full criteria for both manic and depressive states are met at the same time, so most of the time in this is that, so a manic episode with mixed features, full manic criteria met, but only 3 or more of depressive symptoms. In a depressive episode with mixed feature, full depressive criteria is met and 3 or more of the manic symptoms. If it was ever to be a situation where full criteria is met for both manic symptoms and depressive symptoms, then you default to a manic episode with mixed features. So the default when both are present is mania, not depression. But like I said, it is a contentious, confusing phenomenon. This is one of my favorite quotes about anything ever, I feel like, but I don't remember where I got it from, which tells you something. But referring to mixed features, someone said, it's like trying to understand green by studying yellow and blue. So it's that idea that mixed features represent something unique, that it's its own thing, but really we're only trying to understand it by our knowledge of mania and depression, when mixed features are its own unique phenomenon. So yeah, that idea of how do you know if it's a manic episode with depressive features or a depressive episode with manic features? Well, if it's full mania and full depression, then the DSM says just go ahead and go with depression. But like, what? So in DSM-4, it used to be that there was just mixed episode. It wasn't like depressive state with mixed features or manic state with mixed features. It was just mixed episode. So regardless of which one was dominant, it doesn't matter. It's called mixed episode. Same with ICD-10, which is the most recent analog to the DSM-5. The way you code it is bipolar disorder, current episode mixed. That's it. DSM-5, though, says that you have to decide whether it's a depressive episode with mixed features or a manic episode with mixed features. So that's just the way it is. But just know that it's not, if it seems confusing, there's a reason. It is just a confusing condition and phenomenon of this disorder, of these disorders. Yeah. More specifiers, there's with rapid cycling. So this is unique to bipolar disorder. You wouldn't have this in depression alone. There have been at least 4 episodes in the past 12 months. So at least 4 separate mood episodes in the past year would deem the person as having rapid cycling. So the episodes can either be demarcated, meaning kind of bound or have boundaries of either partial or full remission for 2 months is one option. So that means that they've had a major depressive episode, then there needs to be at least 2 months of either partial or full remission before the next episode for it to count as a unique, separate episode to count towards those 4 that are needed in a year for the specifier. Or it could be switching polarity, and if that's the case, then it doesn't need to be 2 or more months of partial or full remission. So I know I didn't set that up properly, but if it's just going from a depressive state to another depressive state, there needs to be 2 months or more of partial or full remission between those 2 depressive states for them to count as 2 separate depressive episodes. However, if you go from a depressive episode to a manic episode, there's no set amount of time that needs to pass for them to count as 2 separate episodes. It can be overnight you switch from manic to depressive. If that's the case, then that's 2 separate episodes. So switching polarity automatically counts as a new episode. But the order this takes place, the way the cycle works can be random or whatever it needs to be. It could be you going from manic episode to a depressed episode to a manic episode to a depressed episode. All in 12 months, you get rapid cycling. Or it could be you go from manic to baseline for 2 months, back to manic to baseline for 2 months, back to manic to baseline for 2 months, back to manic to baseline for 2 months. So yeah, anywhere in between. Just 4 more episodes in the past 12 months is rapid cycling. But if any of those episodes of mania or depression are substance-induced, they don't count towards the 4 that are needed for rapid cycling. Like I said, you specify the severity for manic episodes, mild, moderate, severe. Here they have a little bit of unique for the description of severe. It's almost continual supervision is required to prevent physical harm to self or others. So a severe manic episode is a dangerous state to be in, where they are most likely to hurt themselves or someone else if they're not under constant supervision. And that's because of their impairment in judgment and just the high-risk activities that they're participating in, plus any sort of psychosis that they might be experiencing as well. But yeah, hypomanic episodes don't get severity. If bipolar 2 only gets a severity specifier if the current episode's depressed. Some other stuff about bipolar. 12-month prevalence of bipolar 1 is 0.6%, while bipolar 2 is 0.8%, so pretty similar, but slightly more people have bipolar 2. Average onset age is around 18 years old. This condition is more common in higher income countries. It's very genetic. A 10-fold likelihood of relative as bipolar 1 that you'll have bipolar 1. So it's, 10 times more likely is a huge number in statistics, especially public health statistics. But again, like I said, there is some sort of heredity share between the conditions where bipolar 2 relatives will lead to a bipolar 2 relative, more so than like crossover might happen. And then another note that if someone has a manic episode with psychotic features, it increases the likelihood that their future manic episodes are also going to have psychotic features. So it's kind of like once it happens, it's more likely to happen again. Slightly more men than women have bipolar disorder, but women are more likely to experience the rapid cycling condition of going from depressive to manic episodes more frequently, or just experiencing more depressive or manic episodes more frequently. More likely to have a comorbidity with another condition, so another mental health disorder. Women are more likely to experience more depressive symptoms, and also more likely to experience mixed features. People with bipolar disorder are 15 times more likely than the general population for a lifetime risk of suicide, which again is just astounding numbers. Bipolar disorder is likely to be associated with around a quarter of all suicides in America. 25% of all suicides associated with one mental health condition. It's just unbelievable. And of course, you also have a higher risk for substance use disorder, especially when you look at the symptom of increased risk activities. That's part of it, but also just, a lot of mania and hypomania is just pleasure seeking. So you can see how drugs can just like really line up well with manic episodes, especially things like methamphetamine and stuff. But also because they're experiencing these switches from mania to depression. Even in depressive episodes, someone with bipolar is probably more likely to have substance use issues, because if you think about it, going from this state of mania and feeling the best you ever did in your life to crashing and feeling awful and like you're worthless and deserve to die, it's a lot to experience. And you can see why someone is going to seek self-medication through different drugs to try and feel better. So it's typical that you return to a fully functional level, like a baseline level, in between episodes, but that's not true for everyone. Sometimes you do go straight from episode to episode, but it's more common that there is a return to baseline in between mood episodes. But up to 30% of people show severe impairment or noticeable impairment in work role function, even when they're not in a mood episode. So there's some lingering effects that are still present even outside of the mood episode. So almost 90% of those that have had a manic episode will go on to have another episode. So it's very rare that this is just a one-off kind of thing. Over half of manic episodes occur immediately before major depressive episodes. So why does that pattern make sense? Well, to me, it makes sense because if you think of mania, you are kind of firing at all cylinders, incredibly energetic, top of the world feelings for days and days and days at a time, not getting enough sleep for days and days and days at a time. Eventually, a crash just occurs, and you go from being so manic and driven and wound up to just crashing and being depressed. So it's not, even though it's difficult to return to a baseline from a mood episode, with mania it's less so than with hypomania, because manic, you're driving your body so hard and pushing it so hard that it almost physically crashes and becomes depressed because of the exhaustion that it experiences during a manic episode. Not always the case, but it is more likely during a manic episode. It's also important not to confuse hypomania with several days of euthymia, which is the opposite of dysphoria. It's just a happy mood and restored energy that comes from remission from a major depressive episode. So it's common that when someone is remitting from a major depressive episode, that they feel more energetic and they feel happier because they are coming out of this depressive state. And it can be easy to mistake that increased happiness when you're comparing it to the sadness as hypomania, when really it's just a result of becoming not depressed anymore. Around 20% of people transition directly from mood episode to mood episode without any return to baseline. Most individuals with bipolar 2, so most individuals with bipolar 1 get diagnosed when they're hospitalized or forced to see a psychiatrist. But most people with bipolar 2, they're not hospitalized because that would make them bipolar 1. But they are, so usually they're diagnosed during depressive episodes. Why is that, do you think? Why would someone be more likely to be diagnosed during a depressive episode of bipolar 2 than during a hypomanic episode? Well, it's because during a hypomanic episode, you feel awesome. You're having the best day of your life for days at a time. Why would you go to seek help for that? Why would you seek help for feeling great? There's no reason. Hypomania is not severe enough of a condition to need help from a doctor. It's not severe enough to impair functioning in your life. You're still able to get what you need to get done. It might be harder to focus and to do these things, but you're still able to function. So there's no reason for you to come in contact with outside help when you're feeling that great. But then it's really noticeable going from a hypomanic episode to a depressive episode. So when you do feel depressed, I'm sure you really notice the depression, and then you might wonder, I was feeling so great, why am I depressed now? I should probably go see a psychiatrist. I might have depression. But then the psychiatrist asks you, well, have there ever been times where you just feel really great for a while? And then obviously they ask you a few more questions to get at the diagnosis. But even though you went to the psychiatrist because of your depression, hopefully through the clinical interview, it's understood that those other times you were feeling really great were actually hypomania, and then you get your bipolar 2 diagnosis. So I know we saw Mary in the major depressive episode, but it actually turns out that a day later, after that interview where she was almost non-responsive with the environment, I don't think she had catatonia fully. I think she was just incredibly slowed in her thinking and speech. But a day later, she actually entered a manic episode, and they were able to film that as well. So that's why I think really gives this interview series just a lot of, makes it really special, because it's this real life interview with someone in a depressive episode and a manic episode just a day later. So let's look at that and just note, maybe go back and watch the depressive video that we had if you haven't seen it in a little bit. But if you're just jumping from the last video, really notice like the differences between Mary in her depressive episode and now Mary in her manic episode, especially in her affect and the way she presents herself, her dress, her behavior, all kinds of things that you can observe. You should be able to observe a noticeable difference. So let's watch this video.
Well, Mary, I'm glad you could come back. Can you say how you're feeling this morning?
Oh, on top of the world.
Okay.
Woo, 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 on top of the world.
What are your plans for today?
Oh, it's just going to be one great day.
What are you going to do?
Well, go out, whatever my doctor says I can do. I should say that right now.
Tell me a little bit about that. You mean you may have some restrictions?
Yeah, still.
Uh-huh.
I went off with my husband last night. I beat him up.
What? Now, tell me about that.
I wanted him out of there.
He came to visit?
Yeah, he came to visit me.
Okay.
And he pissed me off, so I wanted him out of there, so I beat him up.
Now, what do you mean you beat him up?
I forcibly beat him up.
You hit him?
Quite a few times. Oh, yeah, slugging it out.
You were saying something earlier about Jesus Christ and the CIA.
Okay, I'm in incognito for the Lord, God Almighty, Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm working for Him. I have been for years.
Now, what do you mean incognito?
I'm a spy.
And what's your mission?
My mission is to fight for the American way.
Can you say more about it?
The Statue of Liberty.
Okay. But I mean, can you talk more about the kinds of things that you have to do or have been doing as part of that mission?
Oh, I can bring up the wind. I can bring the rain. I can bring the sunshine. I can do lots of things through Christ who strengthens me.
Okay. I mean, you can actually cause the wind to come up?
Oh, yes.
Could you do that today if you wanted to?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And what gives you the power to do that?
God.
On our walk down, you were mentioning about the air and the smells, and we saw some flowers. You like the outdoors?
I love the outdoors. It's my favorite place to be is outdoors.
Yeah.
Well, see, when I first met my husband, can I just talk?
Sure, please.
When I first met my husband, we lived underneath a bridge and down at a boat dock. We weren't married.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe we got married in the eyes of God down at this boat dock.
Mm-hmm.
Because he popped my cherry, and I had been married before.
When we first sat down, we asked if you could take your gum out, and you had some strong feelings about that.
I've chewed it since I was a little bitty kid.
Mm-hmm.
Don't hurt my teeth or nothing. I got strong teeth, and I like hard gum.
Mm-hmm.
I like to blow bubbles with it.
Okay. Is that a good piece?
Yeah, it's a real good piece.
Okay.
Want a piece?
No, thanks. So, talk a little bit more about the way that sometimes you start crying? I mean, what's the sort of thing that can get you crying?
Missing my mom, for one.
Okay.
She died. I told you that my mom died.
I think so.
April 5th, 1993.
Uh-huh.
My mother passed away.
What happened?
Well, she hadn't walked for 21 years of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Am I still focused?
You are.
Okay. That sounded funny, didn't it? Am I still focused? Okay, anyway. Back to the seriousness. Okay. She had cancer of the spinal cord when I was 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to take out her backbone, 8 inches of her backbone out to kill the cancerous tumor.
Mm-hmm.
So that means she was paralyzed from her breast down
Mm-hmm.
for 21 years of her life. She died the age of the year I was born, 61.
Hmm.
I believe everything has a purpose under heaven.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
I believe that's the time that God wrote down she was going to die. Before she hit her 62nd birthday, she was going to die and be my guardian angel at 61 of the year I was born.
You mentioned the other day that drinking coffee, something happens to you.
I get drunk on it.
Let's say something about that.
I can get drunk on coffee. I can get drunk on water. I can get drunk on Kool-Aid. I can get drunk on lots of things.
Now, can you get drunk on those things at all times or only at certain times? In your
When I'm high.
When you're having one of these up periods? Yeah. Are there times when being up like this is unpleasant?
It always feels good.
Mm-hmm.
Never feels unpleasant at all. Except for when I can't go to sleep because of it.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm too up and I cannot sleep.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only bad part about it.
How did you sleep last night?
Not worth a damn.
Not good.
No.
How many hours?
I didn't sleep at all. I just rested.
Even though you didn't sleep last night, you still have good energy?
Oh, yeah.
Do you feel as good as if you had gotten a full night's rest?
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Okay. Were you able this morning, feeling this good, were you able to concentrate on things that you wanted to concentrate on?
Sure was. I helped him put some stuff away.
Okay.
I folded laundry.
Okay.
I stocked socks together.
Okay. Do you think that if you were outside the hospital right now, you'd be able to do all the things that you needed to do?
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes when you're feeling this good, do you go out and do things that get you into some kind of trouble?
Oh, sure.
Like what?
Mess around on my husband.
Okay. And it gets you into trouble?
Big time.
Yeah. Okay.
And the voices, my gosh, can I hear the voices?
Talk about the voices.
It's what's around me, like up at the front desk. People outside my window, I can hear them all.
Now, are these voices of people that you can't see?
Right.
Okay. What kinds of things are they saying?
Well, that's none of my business, really.
Is there anything else that you want to mention?
Yes. I'm a morphodite.
Yes, talk about that. You mentioned that to me one time.
Okay. I'm a male and a female mixed.
Okay.
I have both organs. And I believe that that's the way God is up in heaven.
Okay. Mary, I want to thank you for coming back. So we've covered a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Okay.
And cut.
So that was Mary. Again, I think just a real treasure of an interview to have access to. So you should feel thankful that this is online and available for us for our education. Even though, I mean, obviously, so a lot of the most of the videos in this class you'll notice are coming from early 90s and below is what I was going to say, but older. Why do you think that is? Well, it's because we've had a pretty big change in our understanding of ethics and consent. Nowadays, it's understood, and rightly so, that someone that's in a manic episode or a depressed episode doesn't have or shouldn't be given the ability to consent to having themselves filmed and recorded and used in an educational video for the rest of eternity. These videos I'm showing have already been recorded and it's already out there, and there's to me, because it's already happened, there's no use in not using it, because they are the most helpful interviews for me because they are real life. But I think you can understand why these aren't existing anymore, and all the new ones are going to be role plays. Speaking of, there's a lot of debate whether these interviews with this psychiatrist, who's quickly become just my favorite psychiatrist in all the world, she's amazing. I hope you feel the same way. There's a lot of debate on YouTube whether these are actually role plays or real. And I'm really not sure what I decide. In some of those schizophrenia ones that we shown last week, I could have sworn they were real interviews. But I've seen some that have got me questioning it. I think at most they are transcripts of real interviews, if not real interviews themselves. So if they're not real people that are being really interviewed, they're at least, I think, transcripts of real interviews, just because the way that some of these play out, I don't see how it could be a role play. But my bigger point, though, is that it doesn't matter, because regardless, these are still helpful videos that can help us see these symptoms in person. And then there's one more thing I wanted to say. Let me think about it. It's something to do with whether it's fake or not. Oh, yeah. It was that a lot of the criticism or the side that says this is all just acting and not real says it's that because there's no way that, ethically they'd be able to film these things and show them to people. But these were filmed in 1983. Well, we just saw from the last video that Mary's video was filmed in 1994, I think, or was it 95 or 93? So a decade later, they were still being allowed to film these educational videos with real life clients, because there's 100% doubt in my mind that there's 100% no doubt in my mind that Mary is a real person with a real mental health disorder. And that was filmed in 94. So that opens up that anything filmed before 94 also is potentially real. Again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if this is real or not. It's still helpful. But maybe some of you are like me in that it is intriguing trying to discover whether this is real or not. I just can't find any information about this interview series out there. So if anyone has any information, let me know. But let's watch this interview with my favorite person ever, as she interviews someone that is also currently in likely a manic state, because they are, unless this is just a role play, they are in a psychiatric hospital and they've been brought there recently. But let's just listen. And yeah.
Tell me something about the events that took place prior to your admission to the hospital.
Okay. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. I was working out for the Olympic team. Can you dig it?
Why were you doing that?
Because, well, I had this buddy who got thrown out of the place where I was living. And he was supposed to meet me in Hallsville Park. And it was 4 o'clock in the morning and he didn't show up, so I figured that I would work out. And then they got me on a DOC, disorderly conduct, ?
What were you doing when you were working out?
Running back and forth, basically checking out the court, checking out the moves that I'm going to do when I get into the Olympics.
Are you already on the Olympic?
No.
You're not on the team?
No, I'm not on the team.
So you're just trying out. Is that what you're trying to do?
Yes, trying out.
What makes you think you'd be eligible for the Olympics?
Because I'm a damn good basketball player and I had never done nothing wrong in my life before. And so I think I can make the Olympic team.
Why do you say that?
Because I'm in good shape and I got Olympic abilities. I know I have.
What do you mean by Olympic abilities?
Olympic basketball skills. I know I got Olympic basketball skills. I'm better than Oscar Robertson.
Earlier you said you could join the Olympics because you'd never done anything wrong and you were in good shape.
Like nothing I'd be ashamed of, see? Like nothing I'd be ashamed of. Like if I did something wrong that I'd be ashamed of, I think it'd be hard for me to join the Olympic team. Don't you believe?
What do you think about all those fights you've gotten into ever since you were in 7th grade?
Oh, that was just elementary, I mean, that's nothing big. I mean, that's just hassles between elementary kids. I mean, what's that? I mean, maybe I got a SWAT here and there for punching a kid in the face or something. That's nothing big. All right, let's go on.
So, what happened when you were 17?
What happened when I was 17? I was committed to a mental institution. It was a bummer. I amaze myself sometimes.
Why?
I guess it's my personality. I don't know. I'm something else, aren't I? All right, let's go on.
I lost my train of thought. Do you have any plans for the future?
Well, I've also been thinking about becoming a free agent and see what Bobby Leonard thought. What kind of skills he thought I had. See, he's the Indiana Pacers coach. See, I'm a free agent now, and really that's being a nobody. Nobody's looked at me yet. Leonard hasn't. Nobody has. I was going to have my dad get in contact with Leonard, and I mean, if it's a possibility that he could do it. Because I'm a damn good basketball player, and I should be on a professional. Have
you played basketball in the past?
Yes, I played basketball all my life.
In school? Were you on the high school team?
Yes, I was on the 7th grade team. Maybe the 8th, 9th, or 10th. I don't know, it's been so...
So you didn't play varsity?
No, I didn't play varsity. I dropped out. I got married when I was 16 or 17.
How were you feeling when you were playing basketball that night? How would you describe it?
I was feeling great. Fantastic, super. It was like the best feeling in the world, or next to the best feeling in the world.
What's the best feeling in the world?
I don't think you want to know that. All right. I'm getting a little bit cramped.
You can walk around.
All right. I'll walk around. I'll check out the books.
Were you feeling more self-confident than usual?
Oh, heck yes. Like when I was on that basketball court, I felt like I could do anything anybody wanted me to do, except for something ridiculous like shooting a half-court shot and making it.
So one of the things and this was also a really good interview and really informative. One thing I wanted to take note of is just the way that he expresses inappropriate affect, that he's even talking, and Mary showed it as well. She was like laughing when trying to talk about her mother's illness, and he's talking about like having to be institutionalized as a teenager, and he's laughing and finding uncontrollable laughter, almost painful laughter if you watch it back. So I don't know, that's just a very interesting symptom that popped out to me. That is common in manic episodes. But yeah, hopefully you found that interview interesting as well. Some other coding information. I've already talked about this, separate codes for severity, and also whether it's past episode manic, hypomanic, or depressed. But then for bipolar 2, there's just one code. So yeah, looking the book is the best way to do the coding. I'm not sure if I messed up here or not. Is there no difference between the F code for bipolar 2, whether there's manic or hypomania? Hypomania or depression most recently experienced? Let me check. I'm talking so I can possibly delay having to cut this out. Still talking, still looking, and still talking. Yeah, regardless what it is, the code is always F31.81 for bipolar 2. The code changes for bipolar 1 depending on what the most recent episode is and the severity of it. So, that's bipolar. That's it. That's all I'm going to talk about. If you have questions, let me know. I'm sure we do. This wasn't a perfect review of bipolar disorder, but it was my review. So let me know what is confusing. And then we have cyclothymia, which again is maybe I didn't. I said this in a video that I deleted, but it's similar to persistent depressive disorder, at least the pure dysthymia part of persistent depressive disorder. So if you remember, pure dysthymia is just sub major depressive threshold feelings of depression. So feelings of depression that aren't enough to be a major depressive episode consistently for 2 or more years, with there never being a period of no symptoms at all for more than 2 months. Similarly, cyclothymia is for 2 or more years. There have been numerous periods of sub-hypomanic and sub-depressive moods or symptoms. So you've never met the full criteria for a hypomanic episode or a depressive episode, but you have had periods of swapping between increased mood and elevated moods periods and decreased depressed moods, maybe. So again, it's symptoms of depression and symptoms of hypomania, but not the full 5 for depression or all 3 for hypomania. The hypomania one is a little more flexible. The DSM specifically mentions that they've never met full criteria for hypomania, but the big thing is that they've never met full criteria for a major depressive episode, because then you really are butting heads with bipolar 2 if that's the case. But if they've never had a full depressive episode and they've never had a full hypomanic episode, but they've experienced cycles of similar symptoms, then cyclothymia is more likely. It's even the name, cyclothymia. It's a cycle of symptoms. So at least half the time period spent in a mood episode, and they've never been asymptomatic for more than 2 months at a time. There's no law against like it has to go from up to down to up to down. It can be down, 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 up, down, like whatever the pattern is. But they need to have periods of ups and periods of downs that aren't enough to be a full depressive episode or a full hypomanic episode, but are still enough to be noticeable. So criterion A is 2 years of these changes in moods. B is that there's never been 2 months without a mood. C is that they never met criteria for bipolar 1 or 2 or major depressive disorder, which is very important to rule out. It's also very important here to rule out substance use, because substance use can easily have a pattern that mimics cyclothymia, of where, like, if someone is abusing marijuana, during the times where they're using marijuana, they might have a slightly increased mood where it's noticeable that they feel better and they're more energetic and they're happier. And then maybe they are without it for a week or so because they just don't have access to it for a week, and then they become kind of depressed and sad and slightly feeling kind of withdrawal symptoms and just irritable. And then they have access to it again, and they stock up and they're back using their preferred drug of choice and they feel better, and then now they're out again and they go down. So you can easily mimic ups and downs with substance use, especially if someone doesn't have a consistent access to their preferred substance. So it's really important to rule out substance use as not being an explanation for these periods of ups and downs. So very similar male to female ratio. Up to 1% of population is a 12-month prevalence. And 15 to 50% of people risk going on to develop bipolar 1 or 2. So having cyclothymia is a kind of predictor of it developing into a full-on bipolar disorder. But there are people that just remain cyclothymic their entire lives. And then I have a messed up slide, but that's the substance and medication-induced bipolar disorders. So again, just like everything else we've learned this semester, every other section is the same except for bipolar. But there've been a prominent and persistent disturbance characterized by elevated, expansive, irritable mood, with or without depressed mood periods, or the anhedonia part. And there's evidence that this change in moods is related to substances, and it's beyond what would be normally expected for the substance to produce. So again, things like cocaine is known to have a person experience an elevated and expansive mood, but if it's a cocaine-induced bipolar disorder, that expansive elevated mood would last longer than would be expected for that substance to last. So it's lasting longer than a intoxication period. It induced a hypomanic episode. It's a separate thing than the drug itself. So the drug wears off, but the change in mood is still present. That's a substance-induced bipolar disorder. And then medical condition induced or other things like Cushing's disease, multiple sclerosis, strokes, and traumatic brain injuries have all been known to potentially induce conditions that look like bipolar disorder. And then other specified is when you choose a reason why it doesn't fit into these other boxes, but you still think it's in this category. And then unspecified again is just, I don't have a reason, but this is what I think it is. Treatments for bipolar disorder. So the psychosocial, more talk therapy things. CBT is in family therapy is frequently used and is really focused on recognizing that prodromal phase that lead up to a manic or hypomanic episode, so that or that lead up to a depressive episode. But just recognizing when that is happening, so you can seek help for it, is an important part that therapy can help with, especially for your family members, because we'll get into like what insight is in a little bit, but in general, to say that you have poor insight on something means that you have a reduced ability to know what's going on in yourself. So if I'm depressed, but I don't even realize I'm depressed, you could say I have poor insight. Poor insight is common in manic and hypomanic episodes because you're just feeling good. So you have little insight into what's causing this change in mood. You just know you're feeling good. So you might not even, bring it up to anybody because you just feel good. But that's why it's really important to help your family understand the symptoms so that they can see this change early in you, so that you can go and try and get help for it before it ramps up and becomes more difficult to treat. So yeah, CBT family therapy is really focused kind of on recognizing triggers in that prodromal phase, as well as handling symptoms, just learning how to communicate with. So it's what I'm trying to say is that it's not really about trying to reduce the presence of manic or hypomanic episodes. It's really more about how it's more harm reduction than it is treatment in that sense. The psychotropic treatments are primarily used with mood stabilizers, which lithium is one of the oldest mood stabilizers, which is a type of alkaline metal. I don't know my science very well, but it's interesting because lithium naturally occurs in some alkali springs, which I have a picture of there. And even as far back as like ancient Greek times, when people were deemed to be, crazy or manic, they were told to just go drink from the alkaline springs. And some people, after they would drink from these spring waters, would feel better. And that's because lithium was actually in there, and lithium is a mood stabilizer. So lithium can help you stabilize from being in a hypomanic or manic state back to a baseline state. And that's really the point of mood stabilizers, is to stabilize from mania and hypomania back to baseline. It really doesn't do much at all for the depressive episodes, which kind of leads us into why treatment for bipolar disorder can be so difficult, because most of the treatment is focused on limiting mood episodes. And it's much easier to prevent someone from entering a manic or hypomanic episode, because mood stabilizers do just that. They prevent you from becoming manic. But it can be subjectively reported as just feeling very flat, and it stabilizes your mood to a point of like too stabilized. So some people really dislike the feeling that they feel when they're on mood stabilizers. And you really don't recommend antidepressants, especially not with someone with bipolar 1, because many antidepressants can actually induce manic episodes in some people. So you can see the danger there, that you don't, if someone's bipolar 1 and they're in a depressive state and you give them antidepressants and you just kick them into a manic episode, well, sometimes manic episodes that are severe can be more harmful than depressive episodes. So it's like this balancing act that you have to go through. It's more common, I think, that you prescribe antidepressants in bipolar 2, just because mania is less of a threat in bipolar 2. But it's still something that has to be used very, go about very cautiously because of the risks that can happen from antidepressants. So there's some case studies that we'll look at. I think we're using all of these, and they're going to be on Moodle today. But yeah, I look forward to talking about these with everybody on Thursday. I think that's everything I need to talk about. I know that last video is really long and this one is a little bit shorter, so hopefully that's better. But hopefully in general this week we can just all feel like we're on top of the world. Have a nice week.
I'm on top